Yeah. Hey, friends out there in YouTube land. Robert Ham here with, of course, Robert Ham Photography. And today I want to share with you some best practices. In fact, this is going to be a very informal series, but about best practices that can help you with your wedding photography or studio photography business. Of course, these are just my opinions. It doesn't mean that they're 100% correct. I'm sure someone out there will have a great idea, and I'd love for you to share it with me. But as always with this series of videos, if you're not adding to the conversation, don't say anything at all. So if you've got a different way of doing it, if you think that there's a suggestion, definitely leave it down in the comments below. But if you're just firing off ridiculousness, go away. I think that's funny. So here are my best practices. And the first one I'm going to talk about actually happens to be content delivery. Like, how should you deliver your content? How should you look at it and things like that? And specifically dealing with photography, we're talking about images. And so here's how I look at it. First of all, I'm never in a rush, ever, to deliver my images. Now, that being said, in my contracts with the weddings, my client, my guest, definitely has a right to understand a timeline, and I should, as a professional, give them a good timeline that I can actually fulfill. If I ever encounter a spot where I can't fulfill it, I need to be professional enough to identify that ahead of time and then make my client aware so that they won't be waiting. The worst thing that you can ever have happen in your business is your customers asking you questions about when they're going to get stuff. Now, as a small tangent, if they've had that information and you haven't expired your timeline and they're just asking you questions ahead of time, then maybe you haven't set the proper expectations. Because if you've gone over your delivery schedule, your customer won't bug you for anything. Maybe they'll ask you for something special ahead of time, but they really will stick to your delivery schedule as planned. And that's very important with photos. When you're editing images that you've made, you need to make sure that you're not just rushing to put them on the internet. Once they're there, you can't take them back. If someone downloads that image and it's not actually the right way that you want it, you can't take it back. Someone screenshots it, that's it, it's done. So you really have to be careful about how you get the images out there. Now, I'm going to share with you my process in just one moment, but I'd like to remind you that I have already done several different video edit, like my complete edit series, to teach you how I edit photos. And that's not to tell you my recipe, it's just to share with you the tools that I use in Lightroom and why I'm using them so that I can create a specific look. My book of work, all of my weddings have culminated into a particular style over the years, and that's a very unique kind of style that my clients and customers identify with and seek me out for that particular style. It's completely different than when I first started, and the same will be true with you. So the whole purpose of the Complete Edit series videos that I have is more to share with you the process of editing photos, and then you take that process and run with it the way that you will. Create your own look and feel, and that's going to make you develop as a person. It's going to develop a sense of style. It's going to give you confidence. I get a lot of questions about, how do I do that? Can I download a preset? I use no presets. There are no presets. I may make a custom preset for a particular wedding and a particular set of images within that wedding just to help me have a baseline. But I don't go there. There's no downloads that I use. All of these are edited directly by me for the unique wedding at hand. And that's very important. And I don't want to work with presets. Now that we've talked about that, let's go into my process. First of all, I'm going to talk about categories of images. Remember, I've got 5 categories of images: detail shots, pre-wedding shots, wedding ceremony, reception, and then our formal images. That's how I break down a wedding. And of course, I use the star ranking for those, and then I use my colors inside of the stars in order to make it easier for me to find. Generally speaking, I like to deliver about 300 to 400 images. It's really about 300 images is my goal to deliver per wedding. I like to curate galleries and create beautiful wedding albums. I don't like to have lots of duplicate images. So that's the way we go about it. And it takes me about a week to do one particular category of images. Sometimes I work on 1 or 2 category of images at a time. Remember, I like to deliver my images within about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, which is pretty quickly. So that means I am working with several categories of images, but no more than 50, 60 images at a time after I've culled it down maybe a few more. Those are just goals. They're not hardline uses. You don't have to only have 50 images. And if I turn out that I deliver 402 images to a guest, I'm okay with that. But my goal is to cull down to a good amount that isn't overrun with replicas and reproductions and stuff like that. Okay, the next thing that I do is I import. Actually, the very first thing I do is I import into Lightroom. And when I import into Lightroom, I don't have it build any previews. I just let it do minimal previews. And then I go ahead and categorize my images. That's day one. Day two, I begin looking at each category of image. Not all of them. I just take one category and I go through and I X out all of those images that I don't want. Remember, I haven't built large previews. I'm in the library mode and they're just minimal previews. I'm not even zooming in on them. All I'm doing is XXXXX for the ones that I don't like. That way I can flag the ones that I do like and I can just look at my images from there. Once I have that done, I go ahead on day two after I flag the images that I like and I apply an overall tone and look to them. I work my camera calibration. I work my luminance sliders in the calibration area, not in the hue, saturation, and luminance. And I apply from the get-go the vignette, the noise reduction, as well as the any grain that I like for that particular set of images. And that's it. That's what I do on day two. Notice a couple of those things are actually done out of order from what Lightroom suggests. Lightroom says you should do your post-crop vignetting and you should do all that stuff at the end. I do it at the beginning because I'm beginning to build a history of my image and my history, and I want to see that as I go through. That's going to be very important in making sure that I deliver a quality image, is building the history in a particular way. That way I can step back in time and look at it. And remember, we're already at day two. Moving on to day three is when I begin looking at color a little bit more in depth and exposure. So the first thing I do is I make color adjustments specifically with my vibrance and saturation, and then I go into my hue, saturation, and luminance. Going on to day four, that's when I begin working with my my actual exposure. Right? I want to look at my exposure, and I don't ever mess with the exposure slider unless I have to. Usually my exposure is right on, and so I can just use the highlights, the shadows, the whites and black sliders in your basic dialog in order to adjust what I'd like. And you guys know why I do that. Check out one of my complete edit videos and you'll see why I use those sliders instead of just the exposure slider. I try to stay away from that. Okay, so now we're getting into day five. At day five, I can go back and look at these images and I can see all of my adjustments. And it's here at this point in time that I pull back a little bit of that pop and a little bit about that vibrance and the saturation and make it a little bit more normal. And once I do that, I also fine tune and tweak my exposure settings for each one. And now getting into day six, that's when I begin putting all of my work into blemish removal, clarity, skin smoothing if necessary, getting rid of, like rosacea if there is some, working on fixing spots on suits or tuxedos that may be dirty, things like that. And then finally, day seven, the end of that week, I actually look at the images and I make sure that everything's the way that I like, and I go ahead and add any kind of additional feature that's going to make it pop the way that I want it to. And the nice part is by the time I've got a week into this, I've done a couple of things. Number one, I've built a history all the way through so that I can see what I was thinking, right, on that particular image. And that's very important. You want to be able to step backwards in time and just see where your corrections have actually made. You want to be able to use your before and after tool just by in the library clicking the little backslash button and look and see your images, but also see the exact, the history of how they got to where they are. Yeah, because when you look at them, you're going to develop eye strain over time. Your eyes are going to develop memory for the color, looking at your screen, depending on if it's big or small, and you're not really going to be able to maintain a, an hour or 2 hour stretch without giving your eyes some rest. And I also like to do that with image persistency to get rid of the images overnight. I like to just go away from them, so I come back the next day. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I don't make the process go a little bit faster. Sometimes I'll deliver in 4 days my first category of images, generally the formal images. And I don't mind doing that so much with the formal images because they are all taken in very, very consistent lighting. If it's indoors, I've got my flash. If it's outdoors, then, it's got the consistent lighting of the outdoor lighting or whatever. And so it's easier to make those adjustments because the lighting situation is very similar across those because they're done usually within an hour to 45 minutes, and they're done at the exact same spot with just different groups of people. So focal length a lot of times is the same. Your shutter speed and your ISO a lot of time are very, very similar, if not exactly the same once you get it all nailed. So it's easy to make global adjustments a little bit quicker to the images and still come off with a nice thing. The problem that I have, the most difficult time that I have is when I press that publish button. See, my heart starts pounding because that's going to be the first time they're allowed to be seen by the world, and it's the first time I'm going to be viewing them on a device that is not connected to my main editing machine. I'm going to look at these images on a couple different devices. I'm going to pull them up on a mobile device, I'm going to pull them up on a computer, and I'm going to pull them up on a computer and then project that to the TV screen. And I recognize that images and TV screens and monitors and computers and different devices have different color profiles, but my guests may not exactly know that. So when I do this, I'm now testing that images aren't oversaturated or undersaturated on different devices. And then I go back into Lightroom when I find images that are, and I correct them. So I look at a medium in between. Now, lots of times you might say, well, why would you do that? You know, you've got a print preview image, you know, that you're going to print and everything else. And the whole point is we're in such a digital technology age, most of the time, only a few images will be printed, and the guests will most likely print those images through me. And if not, I always ask that they get my guidance before printing from somewhere else so that I can help them. I want them to be able to use their images, but I also want to help them. So lots of times I format my images for being best viewed on multiple devices online because that's where you're most likely going to see my images as well. You won't see one in a print, but you'll see one online. So I may have several different versions of the image and post different versions of the images based on what their purpose is going to be. And that's a very important thing to note. So if we recap, probably hitting 10 minutes, and if you're sticking with me, I want to thank you. If we recap right now, the idea isn't to wait some long time before you post some images. The idea is to rest your eyes and create a history of your image from import to export so that you can see where it worked and make corrections as necessary. Doing so is going to help you be more critical of your own work. If you are your own worst enemy, everyone will praise your work that pays for your work because you'll be the guy sitting there agonizing over the minutest small detail. When you do that, your clients can appreciate that because the work immediately becomes better because you're not settling. And that's what's most important. And this process particularly slows you down. It slows me down, I should say, and makes me look at my work very critically. It makes me look at each individual image multiple times, probably 10 to 20 times, maybe even more, I don't know, but stretching it out over days, making it look at the images over multiple days means I'm not going to make hasty decisions. It means I'm more likely to produce a very consistent product, and it means that the quality as it's uploaded is exactly what I would like for it to be, and it helps me make sure I don't have any surprises. And that builds my brand. And it garners a reputation, and it can do the exact same for you. Once again, it's not about my process, it's just how I do it. This is how I'm sharing with you. This is a best practice for delivering images. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to comment down below. Get chatty with me. Let me know how you do it. Don't forget, check out my work over here on Instagram at RobHamPhoto. You know I love the Instax. This is my 365 project going on strong. I absolutely love it. And I will catch you guys on the flip side. I want to thank you for watching.